so I'm getting the go-ahead from Tyler that we can get started. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for today's webinar, Building an Employer Brand. My name is Christy and I lead partner engagement here at Medical Alley. In my role, I work with so many HR leaders and talent acquisition leaders, and in the conversations that we've had over the last year or so, employer branding keeps coming up again and again, as companies are not only competing for good talent, but I think also looking to hire and retain employees that are a good fit for company culture, so important these days. So I'm really pleased to bring you some top-notch leadership on this topic today. One quick housekeeping thing, we will use the Q&A function for questions. So feel free to pop those in as you have them, and the panelists will answer them as we go and also reserve a little time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. And before we get started, this year's webinar series is made possible by Lee Branding. So as our sponsor, I'm happy to share a short video from Lee Branding at this time. Awesome. Thank you again to Lee Branding for sponsoring the webinar series this year. And now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Karen Phang. Karen is an experienced, strategic, business-oriented human resources leader with over 20 years of experience, spanning from startups to Fortune 100 medtech companies. Now at Avio, Karen partners with business leaders to define and implement pragmatic talent acquisition, engagement, and retention strategies that drive results and facilitate scalable growth. Karen, thank you so much for moderating today's conversation, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everyone. We will go ahead and introduce the rest of the panel before we jump right in. Terri, would you like to go ahead?
Absolutely. I am Terri Lee. I'm president and CEO of Lee Branding, and my focus a lot has been in the employer space and overall corporate branding. And I also serve on our strategy team. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Lauren? Oh, I think you're on mute, Lauren.
I am still on mute. Sorry. It's not a good day unless somebody starts it with one of those.
Right.
I'm Lauren. I lead the brand strategy team at Padilla, Joe Smith. I've been working in the field for a while. Love the topic of employer brand and helping companies think about how they tell their stories to a wide variety of stakeholders.
Fantastic. Thank you. Allie?
I am Arom. So I've been in talent acquisition for 20 plus years, and I am leading talent acquisition for Silk Road Medical, and very passionate about branding. It goes hand in hand, as we mentioned earlier, with hiring and retaining talent.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we look forward to sharing our passion with all of you this morning. So we'll start with perhaps an obvious question, but want to make sure we all have a common definition of what an employer brand is. So I'll ask Lauren to answer that question so that, again, we're using a common definition as we go forward this morning.
Sure. And I think one of the challenges of this world of brand is people will use the same word to describe different things and the different word to describe the same thing, kind of as I think this group here thinks about it, as employer brand is talking about what is the unique offer that you as an organization are providing to employees, recruits, current employees, prospective employees, and thinking about the intersection of where what you offer meets their needs. So that's a little bit of kind of the, in a nutshell, you'll hear it talked about a lot of different ways. and thinking about how do you align on a common definition just so everybody knows what everybody else is talking about. But that's a little bit of kind of how we think about it.
Perfect. And Terri, why should an organization think about creating an employer brand?
Well, sort of what Lauren just said about, that the commonality component of it, but really, why do this? And if you think of it more in the sense of having everyone on the same page, obviously consistency, but also the areas of authenticity, of really representing what this business is, what it stands for, why and the what and the how, really makes that sort of together, that it actually works as a magnet to also have what we refer to as shared value, right? The values of the company matching those of the employee. But also, if you think of it as your employees are also your biggest leaders of that vision outward in the community or where it is, and having a really great perception of that brand or vision also attracts, when we're looking for talent, getting that top talent, getting those folks that really are going to move the company forward, and really helps you on that way of it makes it easier to attract, because everyone knows who you are and everyone can get on board that wants to work for your company. And it can also lead to, if you think of this abstractly, even in ROI, a lot of times we're creating corporate brands or really these employee brands, because it also helps the sales team or whomever might be out there describing the company come together. And then you're also having those brand perceptions out in the world, but also even, at a sales level. So it's very helpful to have that clear, consistent brand, and a couple of reasons why to create that.
Perfect. Thank you. Allie, why was creating an employer brand important for your organization?
Really to help, attract talent initially. And then I think it's really just, as Terri was saying, to tell our story. I was realizing we were doing all these amazing things that the outside community had no idea what our culture was all about. We're still small, we're growing quite a bit, but we were authentically doing these things, but not sharing it with the external world. But you talked about even kind of our employees, and I think it's important for them to connect with what's happening too. We've got 2 brick and mortar buildings, a large field team. It's hard to keep up with all the things that the organization is doing, but I love sharing that on social media, all these different, whether it's a philanthropy effort, whether it's a luncheon celebrating our achievements for the year. I love that if we share it out on social media with all of, internal and external people, they can then be proud of who they work for and what we're doing, and then share it with their communities.
And I know we talked about earlier, particularly in this geography with the war for medtech talent being so pronounced, it's important for medtech companies to really define how they're different from the other medtech companies here in the Twin Cities, especially.
Yeah.
So we've talked about what is an employer brand and why. Maybe now we talk about the how. I don't know who wants to start, because there's a lot of things that are involved in the how. Who wants to start us off, and we can all add to that list?
I can start, because I'll actually hook onto something that Terri mentioned, which is authenticity. And excuse me, the place that we often start is actually talking to employees. It is the best way to actually find out what the real story is that sits within the organization. That can take a lot of different forms depending on the organization, depending on the type of employees. It can be focus groups, it can be one-on-one interviews, it can be a survey. A lot of companies have employee engagement surveys already running. That gives you one form. I think we feel pretty strongly when we do this that actually talking one-on-one or in a focus group with people, because you get amazing stories out of those conversations that start to form the seed of what that employer brand could look like. So that would be my first place to start, is actually thinking about it. The other thing I'll add on there is actually making sure you're talking to your entire organization, which does not mean literally talk to every single person, but it can be really easy to focus on one group. And I said particularly easy to focus on folks who are desk connected, right? Have an email address, sit in front of a desk all day. That's the easy group to find. The harder group to find, and I know this audience has a lot of them, are folks who are salespeople and in the field on a manufacturing floor. Put a hairnet on and walk the manufacturing floor and talk to folks. It's the best way to make sure that employer brand is reflective of the entire organization.
Okay, great.
That's always the best place to start. And I would agree with Lauren. But then on the second side of that is really looking externally, doing a brand audit. Let's look what's happening online. What is your Glassdoor ranking? What are those perceptions, and getting outside that, even talking to maybe key partners, customers, whatnot, to sort of get that perspective. And then it's a way to also match up to say, is there a disconnect? Is that something we need to improve on? Or in some cases, we've had client partners come to us and say, we really have a bad reputation and we need to overcome this. How do we do that? So starting with that, meeting with that authenticity side of it, being honest, looking in that mirror and not being afraid of it, because knowledge is power. So then being able to understand that then can set you on that path of really looking at your brand as a corporate brand. What is it perceived inside and out as we're looking for an employer brand? What are those insights? Who are we targeting? Really look at that target audience would be kind of that next level. And then looking at all of that research, and then what are those things that are gelling together that really are common themes that we can push forward into a strategy that now we can start talking about in a message and a visual and language, and all of that needs to ladder up. So it is a process, but it's also something that can be incredibly powerful, because you can also bring in, as Lauren was saying, all members of that organization, not literally, but functionally, and really be proud of what this is. And again, that's how you start building this, and all those other things that I opened up with why kind of all sets into place. So a few ideas there.
No, that's great. And I know from my experience, that balance between reality and sort of aspiration, because you will interview leaders and they will be aspirational. Employees will be much more grounded in reality. And so synergizing that, so you're not misrepresenting to the external world, is important.
Yeah. One of the things that I've talked about with clients is think about who you are on your best possible day and reach there, right? Because none of us are that 365 days a year, right? If we can reach there, if you reach beyond that, you start to get to a place where someone's going, that's not who you are. And now you have a retention problem, because you bring somebody in who thinks they're getting one thing, but because there's always this balance of aspiration and reality. You can think about who you are in your best possible day and make that your grounding place. Yeah, is a good place to reach for.
Yeah. Allie, thoughts as you've started down this path with your organization on sort of the how?
Yeah, I would say we are still so early in the journey. So our efforts have been a little bit more grassroots, but essentially, initially it was just being able to control the messaging and the brand, through kind of social media and our external facing sites. If you don't control the message just kind of goes its own direction. So it was about sharing. I think that authenticity is key as well. I'd like to share real people, real employees, real stories about things that are important to our employee population and things that we're doing to make a difference in the world. I think people want to feel connected and they want to have that purpose and meaning at their employer, with their jobs today. I mean, I think that's something that has come through, at the end of this, pandemic, that people want more than just a job. They want to have a place where they belong, make an impact, and we spend a lot of hours a day, with our work, world and colleagues. It's nice to have that connection and that community and to be able to share that and celebrate it. And I think somebody in one of our earlier conversations with this group had mentioned too, sometimes when you're sharing your brand, it doesn't resonate with people, and that's okay, because people can then make the decision they don't want to be part of that because they're not resonating with that. So I do think it is that authenticity and telling the story about who we are as a company. We've yet to kind of formalize a lot of aspects, but this cartwheel culture behind me is a good start, where we've really kind of put a fun visual behind some of the key values that are important to us, like leaning into strengths and flexibility and collaboration. I mean, they're so key to having a great business.
And Allie,
go ahead, Terri, go ahead.
Allie, just kind of also the point that when we were discussing prior is this idea of everyone being maybe in a remote area, that it's even more critical to have something that's communicating to the whole team, and really something to really as that focus or that North Star of why we exist as a company, and bringing that through the employees. And also when you bring on an employee and it is the right, you've really followed through on that authenticity. It also, if you've ever, seen a lot of times one great employee might bring others along. And so they're more apt to really be that more from a commitment. So immediate commitment or connection can also extend to other great talent. So there's a lot of things. And when you talk about, the messaging behind you, those are those pillars that can resonate and really, bring that, purpose to life.
So I'm guessing as we start to dive in here, we may have colleagues on the webinar today who are now sitting there going, my leadership will never agree to do this. It makes perfect sense to me, but I don't know how I'm going to get build the business case and get the buy-in to be able to do all of these things that we just outlined. Thoughts from anyone on how you go about building that business case for your leadership?
Tenacity and passion, I think, go a long way. I think just tenacity and passion and communicating, the why behind it. Not even necessarily the ROI. I think sometimes it's hard to measure if you're not as large and sophisticated of an employer. But I think, it's helpful to have champions on the leadership team. But it's a slow shift, and I think start with baby steps and get some partners on board to help you kind of pave this path and start this journey.
I also think having very clear objectives. What are we trying to accomplish through this? Make it not so much about this abstractness of this awareness. Well, what is that awareness going to do? And it's really going to look to, attract great talent. We're going to be able to be visible in the marketplace so that we're able to do that. Talk about those struggles or challenges. You can see that we have open employee asks or open positions, and they've been open so long. Why is that? And really, again, driving that to more of that measurable goals, even doing that brand audit from internal, ask the question, what does our company mean to you? And look at, are we on the same page, or do we have, 18 different answers for this? So again, coming up with those reasons, clear objectives and goals that then can be tracked to whether, it could be an ROI of, it's less dollars to actually invest in hiring, but it may just be, something that, wow, we just need to focus so we're all on the same page and we can get X talent to do what. But being clear on those goals and objectives, I think, is really key.
And the other thing I'd add there is actually expanding it from just recruiting talent to also how do we engage and retain talent. There are myriad statistics out there about the benefits of engagement of talent on the business. And so nobody has to go down and do that. McKinsey and Harvard Business Review have done all that research. You can find them out there. There's a lot out there that shows how employee engagement ties to business results. And so thinking about it on both ends of that spectrum, how do I bring somebody in, but also how do I engage them and keep them really invested in the work that they're doing, can also be a way to start to help somebody understand why this is important. I think intuitively people know it takes a lot of money to hire somebody. And so once you get somebody in the door, don't lose them, right? So how do you help them understand that piece of it too?
Yeah, recruit and keep that top
Mhm.
talent,
Yeah.
because there's a cost to that as well.
And I think too, the other piece that we're describing is being intentional with employer brand, because as I advise many of my clients who tend to be startups and small companies, you have an employer brand, whether you've been intentional about it or not. So it's in your best interest to control, to define and control that message, because your employees are talking, the candidates are talking about all of the experiences they've had with your organization, good, bad, or otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Well, I'm so grateful you guys are bringing it back full circle, because I think being in talent acquisition, I've been tasked with trying to explain that this is not just a recruiting thing. This is a company thing. And customers, I think engaging your customers. We have traditionally been very focused on our physician community and engaging them, which I think, how could you not engage them further by telling amazing things about what we're doing with our people? So I think I think it goes well beyond just recruiting, but as you mentioned, retaining, but also customers.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Allie, that is so true. And even, we've used KOL strategies that, obviously, whether you're, interacting with a product, a device, a health system, but also talking about that experience with a brand, with a company, and what that means, because also we are in the healthcare industry. And that's the other component, is really a lot of our passions and caring for patients and all of those items that come into this. It also is what is our point of view when you are in, from your brand, owning that brand, but from that employee perspective, but all those partners. Again, as I said in the beginning, it all ladders up to that consistency of who you are and what you do. And all of that is powerful, and it brings it all together, from sales to customers to employees. Again, that's the perfect ecosystem that you want to develop.
Yeah. We have our first question from the audience. And as a reminder, please feel free to note questions. We're happy to take them. So the question is, what have you done? And this can be for any of the panelists. What have you done to collect employee stories to feature? And maybe Allie, we'll start with you.
I was going to say I can start. I think, we've done a lot of videos. So really getting, our employees to talk about why they chose to work here and what keeps them here. As Terri had mentioned, this is your best way of sharing your story with the world, of the people that work here. So it's really being intentional about capturing their story and then featuring it. And so that's one way. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add.
Video is exactly, when we're looking at our client partners and the types of materials we're delivering on this, it is absolutely, video is a wonderful way, because then it's digital and you can utilize it in all mediums that you would. We've also developed, what I would say is HR videos, or videos that show each of the the values or pillars of an organization, and then having different areas within that organization, kind of back to Lauren's first, going out on the manufacturing floor and really utilizing all stories and showing how this really, these values or your company beliefs are coming to life, using those quotes. But really, video has been our number one tool that we've been utilizing, and also has been requested.
And often the research you do up front helps uncover the people you want to talk to later, as you're asking the questions up front, and talking to different people in the organization are going to know, oh, that person's got this great story about how their father's been here for 3 generations, and before that, you can start to pick those. But we found a lot that keeping track of who you talk to in the research to start, and then reapproaching them, that's how you start to get some of those, find where those stories live.
Yeah. And I know in my experience, oftentimes, and I'm sure this is how it's still done today, but you pull together your like groups of employees and conduct the focus groups, and you have a series of questions that help guide that conversation. And to your point, naturally in that discussion will come those stories that you make a note to highlight for the creative that comes later.
And highlighting those areas of maybe it's internal, maybe a mentor program or the way that you work in the community, really also offering those things that, again, even on first day or in a recruiting, wow, oh, that's incredible. I can, actually give back to the community one day of a month, things that are maybe not, all around a benefits package, but also building that community and residents, what resonates, and then, bringing those stories to light as well.
I love that. I think my challenge is, keeping it manageable, right? I would love to get to a point where every time I have a position open, I have the hiring manager on video talking about their leadership style and the opportunities for growth and like the culture and all these amazing things within their organization. So I would love to do that. It's not quite as realistic, but I love the idea of just sharing that, and video I think has been awesome. But it's a lot of work. Tyler within this, Tyler within Medical Alley has been an amazing partner for us as well from a video perspective.
Perfect. So we've talked about the what, the why, the how. Now I think it might be helpful for folks to hear about some best practices. And we have a question. As a leader of a clinical organization and a physician myself, do you have examples of organizations who are best in class with frontline staff and clinicians? I find that the brand is great, but often the culture is different. So back to the point of consistency, make sure that what you're representing is actually the reality. Thoughts on the best practice for that particular scenario?
And I'll use an example kind of to answer that on, when I talked about, a company that we had been working with really came to us saying we have really bad brand perception. And so really to help them was going back to those best practices, and that what came back to alignment. And like I said, sometimes honesty and really making sure that you are representing that truth within the organization takes that rigor. But the best practices start with really that honest look, really engaging in internal, external, and then developing that consistency. Let's say there's a disconnect. It's really about how do we bring that to light. In the case of the company I was talking about, there almost was an employee apology and saying that we have not been committed to our vision, and here's how we're going to do it. And being open with that, again, starting with really realizing what is that opportunity we have, and really driving to that. There's amazing companies in this industry, large companies that really do a good job. And when you look at, I'll just use one company, there are many others, so I don't want to isolate anybody, but when you look at Medtronic and their core tenets and how they take that brand to heart with a medallion, a belief system, and really driving that. And then, looking at then what is that perception of physicians or people that work with the Medtronic brand? That's where you're looking at. And everyone has a perception of Medtronic or Abbott or whatever it is, but it's really that alignment. So best practices are truly engaging on what you're doing and bringing like-minded forward. Now, Allie in our preamble said, well, I don't want to hire a bunch of team members that all think the same. It's not about thinking the same. It's by having that inherent value, that shared value, but we all come to that value with different perspectives and add on. So when you look at best practices, it comes within, but it's matching truly what you do.
Lauren, any thoughts on best practices from your point of view?
Yeah, I think one of the other things is, we're talking about talking to employees to inform employer brand, and almost always does that mean that you're going to uncover things that have nothing to do with employer brand and the brand you're building. And being able to know that, hey, there may be something you can't say externally right now because you've got something you need to really think about and fix internally. And committing to this thing came up and either we need to make a change or we need to explain why we can't, right? That's a big piece of this is you hear from somebody, oh my goodness, I can't believe we don't do X, Y, Z. And there's a really good reason why we can't do X, Y, Z, but nobody's ever explained it. So not only asking for your own purpose of building an employer brand, but saying, I'm also going to make a commitment to answer the concerns that might get raised through the process, helps also build that, brand is beautiful, culture is something else.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're responding to the things that you're hearing that aren't that great. There's going to be some.
Yeah. Well, and I know in my experience, and again, I welcome thoughts on this as well. Once the some of the brand themes have been defined, that there's a training element for the organization to understand what that employer brand is, because all of your employees become your brand ambassadors. And so another one of our questions is, what do you do if the way employees define your brand is out of alignment with the way your company defines it to consumers or other external stakeholders?
Change it so it matches. You have to go do the work. I mean,
Back to being intentional, right? You have to intentionally help them understand the key messages.
And that may be one of two layers, right? That may be actually, employer brand theoretically and ideally ladders up to actually a corporate brand that's already been defined. Sometimes it doesn't happen in that direction, and we can all acknowledge that. It could be that there's something in the way the corporate brand is being articulated that doesn't feel true to employees. And so you're telling two separate messages. It could be that the employer brand in the way it's been articulated doesn't match. So there's something in that disconnect, and it could be at either level or both that you maybe need to address.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in building a corporate brand, sometimes a lot of common buzzwords, commonality, phrases that, is used a lot, and that also doesn't necessarily ladder up to the true feeling. If we say that we're, a technology driven company, well, what does that mean?
Sure.
What does that mean to our product and services? And, we say that we're cutting edge. Well, what does that mean? And so it's really also identifying, as Lauren was saying, it's sometimes just a vernacular, but also being true to what's really happening. And a lot of times, and that's what's been happening in the industry now, we are having a lot of discussions around corporate brand and employee brand based on when a company might be launching a series of new products or an acquisition and coming in and redefining what this means. So a lot of times this isn't a set it and forget it, because everything's changing. So it's really evaluating who we are as a company, who we are as a corporate brand, laddering this all the way down to our needs, which is hiring. So it's really important that when you do see this disconnect, that it can be better. It doesn't have to be this way, but we have to dig in and again, as you said, Karen, be intentional.
Yeah. Ellie, I'd be curious, as you're starting down this path of employer brand, and maybe it is too early, how will your organization ensure that your employees understand that intentional messaging?
Oh, that's such a great question. I don't know how to answer that if I'm being
And maybe you're not there yet, which is okay.
I don't know that we're there yet. I do think it's pulling them into the brand and at least having those, those conversations with them. I think intentionality about continuing to improve the culture, if I'm being honest. I mean, you talked about setting it and forgetting it. I explained to people coming in the door that it's evolving. I mean, we are hiring over 100 people every year. Our culture and our brand is evolving, alongside of that.
Okay, great. Well, we have another question from the audience, which is great. So once the brand strategy has been identified and content is deployed through a number of mediums, what metrics do you see used to gauge the progress in the perception of the company as an employer?
I can take that off the start, is really setting up, again, those clear goals and objectives, and then how are we going to measure that? So a lot of times we're seeing an audit or a brand audit or a survey that's done internally, as well as you can do an external brand audit. And then pushing those messaging, however we're doing that, and then coming back, within a period of time that could be, in 6 months, or depending what we want to do or what we're trying to drive to. Maybe we're using this as a benchmark to then move to that next level, is really then engaging and understanding, well, if this is so we know what we're putting into the marketplace, and let's see how that's reflected. Is it remembered? Can it be recited? Can it be stated, to really understand, is this resonating? And then using that as a benchmark to see, are we getting traction here? Also, when you are doing, let's say you are interviewing employees, asking them what the brand means to them, what they had heard. Why do they want to come? And not, again, you're asking a lot of interview questions, but even having that after, would you be interested in just answering a survey about this process, and including some of those questions so you can continue to have metrics and balance. And also, let's say you're not, maybe it's taking a lot longer to fill positions, and you can look at those surveys and say, well, they just aren't seeing, let's say you aren't giving enough into the community. Well, now that's information. Well, we do that. We just haven't been talking about it. So it's really just, again, letting that brand evolve, but really utilizing a feedback connecting point to help us. Again, that's great with digital and putting things out there. You can get response.
A bit of a test on the messaging back with employees.
I think
Lauren, thoughts? Oh, sorry, Ellie, go ahead.
No, I was going to say a simple metric is just kind of your followers, right? How many people are connected to your brand on social media, and has that needle moved? I mean, that's a huge metric. And for us, even employee referrals. I mean, I think that's good. I mean, people are resonating with the brand. And that is a proof of it. Over 50% of our hires are internal referrals. That's huge. We love that.
That's great. That's great. We've talked a little bit about mediums where the brand can be placed. There's a question about Glassdoor, everyone's favorite social media platform, Glassdoor. The question is essentially, do you respond to what you see on Glassdoor? If so, how and why? If not, how and why? In the spirit of maintaining that consistent employer brand specifically.
I'll bring up, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're saying from a negative perspective, right?
Yes.
Negative feedback. I mean, I think address it head on. It's authenticity of trying to be better. We appreciate the feedback, and we're willing to look at this and to be, have a commitment to be better.
There was a piece in there about prompting employees. I think you can ask, but there is a very fine line between asking and pushing. Because I was at a former employer who did this and sort of said, everybody's got to write a good positive review. And then you get into the problem again of now putting something out to the market that's not really real. I think you can absolutely ask, you just have to be very careful about what that line is, that it's clear that you want somebody to be true about it, not, hey, you have to go and give us 5 stars on Glassdoor. Is not. To get you where you want to go.
100%.
Well, and use that as a gauge. That's again with the example, it was, pharmaceutical manufacturer, and it was really not good. There wasn't a positive comment. So it was almost impossible for them to respond to everything. And so as they were opening a new facility in a different market, we created kind of that myth busting. We're doing better, being honest on a billboard in a community saying, we know, but we are on this mission to create X for Y. And we're looking for really great minded people, being honest with it. But it is hard in Glassdoor to respond to every single thing, but use it as a gauge. It's sort of like doing a social audit of your own brand, looking at that. And, maybe there is a point where you do want to put a message in there, but again, there's going to be positive But I would agree, you can't just, stack the cards and have people just saying things that are not true, or, we're listening. Thank you for that input. And here's how we're going to do better.
Mm-hmm. I know, that's great. We've talked about a couple of different audiences and employer brand. We've talked about candidates, potential employees. We've talked about current employees. There's a question about how to convey the employer brand to contract workers versus regular employees.
I can answer that, or if anybody else, in my mind, it's the same.
Well, that's what I was gonna say too. I don't
Right?
know
Isn't that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Even though they're not employees, right?
They're
But they're
part of the brand because they are working in the same space.
Yeah, and I think part of that question was, they're not typically onboarded in the same way. And, onboarding is a big piece of employer brand. And so thinking about, okay, if they're not onboarded in the same way, what are the most important parts of this employer brand for me to get across to them? It may be a different way, right? It's not going to be the full week-long onboarding process, but I can make sure that there's a 3-minute module that they're watching, or there's a podcast that they can listen to. And I think the same can also be true of when you have desk-based employees and non-desk-based employees, where that's another place we have to think about, how am I delivering the information in different ways, depending on the audience that I'm trying to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. Or having that short video that really just gives the highlights of what your company and brand means. And again, everyone who's working for or with has that perception, and they are in the folks in the world defining that. So if they are working for your business as a contractor and they ask, hey, what, why do you actually work for them? To have a consistent, good answer is good. But if they have no onboarding or no way of connecting, then they're free to say whatever they want, which would be completely maybe not what the brand means or what you're going for. So onboarding or taking that time, but knowing they represent your brand, because contract is a reality and it's so important. And also that gets you into other areas where your brand wouldn't penetrate or be seen. So taking that time to think about that could be helpful.
Yeah, contract or full-time. I mean, people
Absolutely.
want that purpose and meaning and that connection and that impact. I don't think it matters how you're paid essentially, but.
Yeah, absolutely. We have about 15 minutes left. So again, one more reminder for those on the line to submit your questions. Great questions. So thank you for sharing. Ellie and I represent sort of the in-house practitioner perspective on all of this. I'd be curious to hear from our agency friends if there's any specific current trends that are unique to Medtech as you're working with other clients. Any comments there?
Well, from the medical perspective, and that's really my expertise, Lee Branding is 100% focused in medical and healthcare. And right now, from a trend perspective, and I'll just use from our kind of client base, what we're seeing is a really look inward. There is so much change in this environment going on right now, acquisitions, spin-offs. It's quite a lot. There are incredible amounts of layoffs. There's transition. And really this idea of clarifying, simplifying who and what we stand for. And when you also are looking at expanding, or as I kind of hinted, earlier of, adding maybe new products, to come back and really go back to the fundamentals and think about what are we saying from a corporate level? What are we, laddering up to? What is going to change? And really being kind of looking in the mirror again. And as I said earlier, not setting it and forgetting it. There's been just a lot of self-awareness in this area. And it's coming from this community of uncertainty. Again, there's always immense growth. But there's also this wanting to truly represent and what their perspective is in the marketplace with partners, with physicians, and also really in this passion industry. we find a lot of similarities of our talent in this industry and that passion, but it's also really defining that. And everyone wants to be the greatest representation of patient, but it's really trying to understand really what are we making a difference truly, getting rid of the buzzwords, trying to be different, so that you are able to, again, it's based on trying to get your brand perceived, as that leadership, but it's also clarifying what truly are we doing here with all of these changes. We also are seeing a lot more of this idea of KOL influencing, really wanting to have people outside of our company really reflecting what is good about our company. And I know that's not directly to employee brand, but it is. It's really simplifying and having that representation to say, why do we work with this? And we're finding that you are attracting more talent when there's that positive perception, or at least a company that's dedicated to it, because that vision is stronger. A lot of times employees are leaving because they're unsure where this vision is going. So it's, again, reflecting on that. So from the industry, the change and all of these kind of complexities are coming back to those fundamentals and coming to, Lee Branding and other agencies and saying, what do we do? Who are we? We've kind of lost our way.
And Terri, real quick, for those that might not know, KOL stands for?
Thank you. Key opinion leader.
We're great with our acronyms, aren't we?
Yeah, key opinion leaders.
Thank you, key opinion leader. Lauren, thoughts from your?
Yeah, I think, Joe Smith and Padilla work across a variety of agencies, a variety of industries, have some specialty in medtech, and we are seeing similarities across different industries as people are just coming out of this turbulence of the pandemic. Like, it really is, okay, we just went, right? We just had to go for 2-3 years and survive. And we're just coming out of this space of survival. And what does that mean? And how have we changed, right? In that 3 years, how have we changed? And also a recognition that medtech is no longer only competing with medtech, right? Medtech is now competing, and this was true beforehand. It's become increasingly more true that when you look at your competitive set from an employer brand perspective, right? Unless you're dealing with people who are very specialized, it's everybody. And thinking about what are you seeing in other industries that you're trying to compete against as people get more remote, as people are more willing to pick themselves up and move to a different location. So we've seen a lot of that, like, okay, we've got to take just a moment to breathe and do a little bit of what's the same, what's different, and look outside of kind of our four walls of our business and four walls of our industry.
Sure. No, that's great. I'd be curious, and perhaps a bit of the elephant in the room. Terri, you talked about Medtronic, and we all know their unfortunate headline recently. As people at Medtronic sort of sit internally with the fact that they've had to reduce their workforce, how do they intentionally think about brand at a time like this? Because again, they've had to downsize some folks. There's internal talent that they want to retain and need to retain, but that internal talent is naturally going to be restless. They still need to hire people at some point, so that attraction piece is still very real. How do they, as sort of the leader in our space, really sort of step back and take employer brand into account at a time that is not as positive as it usually is?
In my mind, I can start is really looking at why the organization is doing what it's doing. There's clearly a vision. There's clearly reasoning to do what they're doing in the headlines. So being really as transparent as possible. Again, even Allie said sometimes, we don't know, or we can't maybe talk about everything, but really being as transparent as possible of the reason for doing this. And it really, and again, without having that clarification, that allows everyone to create their own narrative of what this means. And if it really is to enhance and move toward more innovation or more R&D or speed to market, or we're utilizing dollars to do X or Y, that allows everyone to understand there's a purpose and reason for this. Otherwise, it comes off as really, are they in trouble? You come up with your own negative narrative when you could say the reason for this is because we have this North Star and we're driving because of our mission, vision, values, or what we're trying to do in this world, not using buzzwords, and really driving to that and really creating that we are doing this to create this for this purpose. Again, being that authenticity or being as honest as possible to say why we're doing it will help. Again, as Ali said, if you don't control the narrative, then the narrative will control itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Lauren, thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there is a tendency to not want to say anything when something is negative, right? I'm just going to say nothing and hope it goes away. And it is the worst possible thing you can do, right? Like, right, hear no evil, see no evil. And then you let stories create themselves. And there's things you can't talk about because it's HR and it's personnel, and that's
right.
But there are things you can provide. And even if it's, we don't know, right? That can be really powerful for people to say, listen, here's what we do know, here's what we don't know, but we're going to keep you informed. That's, I think most employees will understand that, right? That there is some reality of the world we're living in. And this is not the only headline in the news right now of unfortunate layoffs. And the more you can give even we don't know this piece of the equation, and here are the things we do know, the better off you're going to be.
And that transparency, you can never be wrong if you just hit it head on.
Well, and for those organizations that are hiring, it's a great opportunity to really think about where those messages need to be so that they are in front of some of that talent that's looking for new opportunities. So great. Well, with the few minutes we have left, I'd like each of you to share sort of your words of wisdom to this group as we sort of put a bow on this and others go back to their day jobs, and many are going to be obviously as passionate as we are about this employer brand. What are one or two things that you want to leave this audience with?
I was just thinking about, we all make up the brand, right? So if corporate has this brand and you're not resonating with it, I mean, start having some of those discussions. But every employee we have here makes up the brand. Mm-hmm. So we all contribute to that, and we all want that in a positive way. I want to work for a company that has a hope and positivity and, and spreads joy and makes an impact. And at the end of the day, we all take a piece of that and own that. Mm-hmm. That's just immediately what I was thinking. But then the tenacity and the communication of sharing your passions, without a doubt.
Great.
I think the thing that I was thinking about is this can feel really overwhelming. It can feel really, really big. And it's okay to take this in bite-sized pieces. This does not need to be tackle everything all at once and then, spread it out into the world. It is okay to take pieces of this at a time and do a focus group here or there to start to refine the message. If you feel like you can't take it all on at once, that's okay. And thinking about the fact that this also takes time to change, and you may not see a change for 9 to 12, 18 months. Unfortunately, brand moves real slow. And accepting that as okay, right? Small little incremental steps that may take some time. It's starting somewhere rather than kind of sitting in paralysis and going, we can't touch it. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, we always call it's a journey, right? It is a journey. And when I've spoken a lot, our team here has said a lot of those words, but authenticity, looking in that mirror, starting with the fundamentals, really honing in what is working, what isn't, really looking at what that means. And ultimately, why authenticity? Well, it's called trust. To have employees and trust the company and the brand that they're working for. Trust isn't a hard thing to gain someone's trust is not something you can buy or you can put into play. It has to come from what you truly are doing in the marketplace. And so with the authenticity brings trust. And then ultimately you're able to have that consistency. And consistency is the best way to carry on a company. And then be honest, if that changes, it's okay. We can go back and really start that process again, because this is an ever-changing environment. And that's why, companies like myself and Lauren's and others, we have a lot of these businesses coming to us with these real challenges. And that's where that partnership we often, that we offer. And it's really about that authenticity, the trust of your brand, and then that consistency. So, but it is a journey, and an exciting journey, but it is a journey.
And I would just add, from my perspective and experience, a couple of things. One, while HR or talent acquisition may lead the initiative, it is not an HR initiative solely. It requires the organization and particularly leadership to be on board. And the other thing is, as I've said before, really being intentional, because you will have an employer brand, whether you've been intentional about it or not. So best to control that message. So I want to say thank you to all of the panelists. It's been a great session. We could continue to talk for hours as we have done in the past, but I'll turn it back to Christy for closing remarks.
Christy,
Oh, I think you're on mute, Christy.
I started, you end.
There we go. All right, everyone. Karen, Allie, Lauren, Terry, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I think everybody has walked away with really valuable nuggets of information and a plan to kind of get started on building an employer brand. So thank you. We've achieved our goal for today. Thank you again to Lee Branding for your very generous sponsorship to make these webinars possible. To all of you who are watching in Medical Alley, thank you for joining us today. Two quick things before we sign off and everyone gets on with their day. First, next month's webinar, I think, is also very relevant to this group. It's on May 23rd, and the subject is redefining qualified job candidates. So you can register and learn more about it and register at medicalalley.org. While you're there, be sure to check out our new job board. We just relaunched a new and improved job board, which also now includes a talent pool. So great resources to help you find, the best talent in Medical Alley. Secondly, if you're not registered for the annual dinner, Medical Alley's annual dinner, I'd remind you that the biggest night in healthcare is just 2 weeks away, and you have 1 week left to register. So we'll be hearing from the best of the best in health and wellness, Deepak Chopra, live and in person. I hope to see all of you there. Finally, if you're looking to connect with any of today's panelists or resources in Medical Alley, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the website. And until next time, I hope you all will be well, take care of yourselves and others. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.